Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Seeing Red unofficial Arsenal podcast with me, Tom Canton, your host, and joined as always, forever, by chief football writer from the Mirror, John Cross. How you doing, mate? You good? You well?
Yeah, brilliant, Tom. Brilliant. Had a an entertaining weekend. Not without drama, wasn't it? But I must salute you first and foremost because it was your birthday, wasn't it?
It
And
was.
your birthday weekend. How was your birthday weekend, Tom?
As birthday weekends go, not too shabby. A Friday night just with friends and family. Saturday, accidentally getting backstage to my favourite artist gig in Camden, and then watching
Come
Arsenal.
on, you got to tell us who your favourite artist is.
Or Subfocus is my favourite artist. You know, it's eclectic, it's dry and bass. Like it's not, it's not people are going to turn around and be like, "Who?"
When you told me that, I was kind of quite pleased that I used to go to that venue. Back in the day, you know, so we're sort of in touch, you know. Yeah. And then what happened yesterday?
And then yesterday there was some. Sure Arsenal played. Did they play yesterday? I think they did.
Was it the North London derby? Do you think?
I think it might have been. I think it might have been rather entertaining. Arsenal winning 4-1 against Spurs to cap off. Yeah, a kind of perfect weekend. I got home and said to the missus, you know, barring us getting married, and I probably should say the honeymoon, it's probably one of the best weekends of my life. So
you've deserved it.
But I had to leave those little caveats in, of course. Otherwise, I would have been in trouble. But yes, John, we were both there yesterday for Arsenal's absolute battering of Tottenham Hotspur in a game in which obviously there was a lot of talk before with the reaction to Sunderland and the dropping points there. And of course, also the narrative that both on Saturday, Liverpool and Manchester City, both beaten in their respective games. So it was nice to kind of, I think, as we walked into the ground, get a few nice comments from people that seem to have enjoyed the first episode that we've done together.
Really nice, yeah. From one of the stewards on the door, who's a lovely, lovely guy, and basically, really, you know, they always enjoy seeing him. And basically, and just a few people passing by where I sit, you know. And I must say, where I sit, and basically, it's really nice. I think we referred to it last week. You just feel part of the crowd, and then basically, I love in whatever stadium in the country, I love being close to the fans, really, to feel the energy, to feel the kind of, you know, vibrancy, and then to kind of have some nice compliments and sort of people talking about the show. And that's, it was beautiful, actually. It really, really meant a lot, actually, because it was just, it was just, enjoy talking football, don't we? And sort of kind of, you know, chewing the fat and sort of kind of what might happen, what might not. Yeah, laughing at my predictions that basically Arsenal might slip up, obviously, but I thought Spurs would be a lot better than they were. But we'll come on to that, I'm sure. But you know, it was a really nice sort of feedback to that first show. So let's hope we can build on it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think you can predict draws for the rest of the season, as far as I'm concerned, mate.
I'll go with the whole hog. Just go defeat. They'll lose every game.
Yeah,
and that'll be fine.
Well, maybe we don't upset the apple cart, and we'll just just keep things going and rolling with the draws. But yeah, I mean, we've got some difficult games actually. Where draws might be a fair prediction, but we'll get to that later on in today's show. It was a game that kicked off, well, just before the kickoff. Actually, there was a lot of attention in the stadium because. And I don't want to bring people's memories back to that Champions League game against PSG last season, where Arsenal erected a rather half-hung flag of the cannon, which obviously had all good intentions, but wasn't necessarily executed in the right way to then go to the Parc des Princes and watch an unbelievable show of you know, artistry, but just occasion in what their fans put together. But to go from that to what the fan groups and the club came together to create in the tifo of the Arsenal North London derby themed artwork, I thought it was a great spectacle. John, what did you think?
Yeah, I did enjoy it. I do like a tifo. I think the bad ones are bad, and totally unimaginative, but the good ones are art. They are genuinely works of art, and I just thought that was brilliant. And I did think it was really, I mean, listen, you'd expect a good atmosphere for a North London derby, and you generally get it. But it's interesting. I was talking to actually someone from the club before the game, and basically we're chewing the fat over what's been a good atmosphere and what's been a good game for an atmosphere this season. And I think it was West Ham rather divided opinion. You know, basically some people thought it was a bit flat and quiet, was listening to the radio commentary that day, and then basically because as a game the next day. And they were saying how good the atmosphere was and how the crowd, so you're never you're never going to get complete agreement, I think. And you rarely get, I think, agreement amongst fans about what is the right thing to do and what is the, the wrong way and so on. But I think there was a lot of universal love for that tifo. At the top of the tifo, which had loads of club legends and fabulous players, was Sol Campbell, of course, and then basically, I like the fact that basically right near the top also there's David Rocastle,
of course,
and just wonderful club legends really. And I thought the artistry struck it home. Had a sort of almost a European feel. There's no need to kind of get into this kind of Euro sort of kind of rock music or anything like that before anyone suggests that you always get in European grounds. But I just thought that actually set a nice tone, good whipping up the atmosphere, nice fireworks before, really good. I think it's sort of kind of positive, and everyone bought into it, didn't they?
Yeah, they really, really did. And just on that point of kind of like it's different fan experiences depending where you are. I remember when I was in Bilbao earlier in the season, one of the most amazing atmospheres I've experienced when I was there. And I was chatting to a couple of Arsenal fans afterwards, and they were like, "Could you hear us from the press box?" And I was like, "No, could not hear a thing." And they were saying we were chanting our lungs out all game. And I was like, "I'm sure you were, but you were drowned out by 40,000 Basque men and women just absolutely singing beyond anything." So the experiences about where you are in the stadium absolutely relate so differently. You can have different experiences in different corners of the ground, but from every angle, that tifo looked at. There's amazing photos, the fireworks and all that. And obviously Mikel Arteta is a big driving force behind a lot of what goes on in the stadium and the name calling and things like that when players score. And thankfully there was plenty of that because Arsenal scored plenty of goals during the game. So to go into it and how things, because I thought that the energy at the start didn't necessarily match how the game began. Arsenal had a couple of moments where Eze's little flick over to Declan Rice's volley, but that was really the only main chance until Saka started to get a couple of free kicks on the right. And Spurs did quite well, I thought, John, to kind of nullify the initial energy. And it wasn't until obviously that first the first Trossard goal that the momentum again swung heavily in Arsenal's favour. But how did you find that first half?
Yeah, it was a strange game like that. What I would say was that I was surprised at how dominant Arsenal were. And I think that was largely down to Arsenal really playing well. I thought they were absolutely at it. Their levels were great. I did think the movement was strong. They were really, really strong and aggressive, press forward. I totally agree. They didn't create too many clear-cut chances. I mean, I think that was 4th minute, wasn't it, with Rice?
Yeah.
If that had gone in, I think the roof would have come off the place, and basically, then you could have seen Arsenal swamping Spurs then. But they did obviously have to wait until the 36th minute. But what struck me was that how passive Spurs were. I honestly, Arsenal was so dominant last season at the Emirates in that game. I think it was only 2-1 though in the end. But then basically there was only one team in it, and I was so surprised at how poor Spurs were, and so surprised at how uncompetitive they were. Really, Thomas Frank was talking afterwards about not sort of kind of winning duels, and was, saying it wasn't about battling, it wasn't about that, it was about not winning our duels. Well, you have to battle to win your duels, surely, But basically, and so I think that was a little bit hard to understand. But I was really impressed with the way that Arsenal stayed patient, remained calm in a incredible, ferocious atmosphere. And I must say, I thought yesterday the performance in that game was one of their best performances of the season. They were utterly dominant, and eventually the goals rewarded. And what really struck me was they went in 2-0 at half time. Saw a couple of, the sort of former Spurs players there, sort of thing, and basically I sort of kind of know, and they were blown away by how poor Spurs were, but also, much more importantly, I guess, how dominant Arsenal were, and Arsenal imposed that dominance as much as Spurs allowed them to be dominant as well. So I thought it was a really encompassing and brilliant performance. A big test for Arsenal, really big test, and to come through it in such style. I don't know what you thought, Tom, but I thought that was brilliant and really blew me away. I thought it was a performance that makes you think, wow, that is some performance, that's some response.
Yeah, like any concerns I had after the Sunderland game just evaporated, really, really quickly, noticing how good we were, how dominant we were, how limiting we were of them, and what they did. And obviously, we mentioned in the last episode that it would be 14 years since a derby was played without Harry Kane or Heung-min Son involved. And it really did feel like Spurs lacked any kind of protagonists in the game. There were a couple of moments. The Richarlison goal is a brilliant goal. And, from a Spurs perspective, you want to see those goals scored in games that you win, not ones that you're losing in a derby. But they did lack in position. They lacked such imposing figures. And I have a lot of time for Van der Ven, and I think he's a brilliant defender. And I think he really stopped Arsenal in certain moments from this getting to the point where it'd be really embarrassing for Tottenham, and it would have made it a lot worse. But everybody in this Arsenal team just stepped up in so many ways. We're going to come into some individual performances, certainly, and the big names that you can expect, but just some lesser names as well. I thought Timber was excellent. I thought Declan Rice was sublime. Besides Zubimendi's error where he gave the ball away for the Richarlison, I thought he orchestrated things from midfield so well and just kind of kept the pressure on and recycling of the ball dropping into the back line and then recycling it out. But before we go into the two main heroes, I think it might be appropriate, while I'm mentioning some of these other names, to bring up the man who would replace someone who's really taken a real personality of the derby in Gabriel. And without him, there was this big question about what would happen. Would it be Mosquera? Would it be Lewis Skelly maybe and Calafiori moving inside? But it was Piero Hincapié, and you were particularly impressed by him.
Oh, I thought it was great. Absolutely brilliant. I think you've got to understand that basically this is a guy from a really high level that basically has enjoyed success with Bayer Leverkusen, been part of a successful Leverkusen team, and then basically also Ecuador. Honestly, there'll be a lot of talk about Ecuador over the next 7 months or so, basically in the build up to the World Cup, because they will be seen as kind of Douglas. They've got remarkable, sort of individuals. Hincapié is at the heart of that. I thought he was absolutely magnificent. It was an incredible piece of business, I thought, that Arsenal pulled off in the late stages of the window, because you've signed a player who probably knows he's going to have to go into a squad and then also be part of that squad, not absolutely nailed down. And basically, very, very a good, accomplished player. To get him on the kind of a season-long loan with an option, I think, is a remarkable piece of business. And basically, he knows then that basically he's probably going to go in there as second fiddle. Gabriel, I must say, I mean, regular listeners will soon know that basically Bukayo Saka is like, is my favourite player. But basically, I just love watching him play.
As youngsters would say these days.
He's a joy, isn't he? Because I just think I watch Arsenal and England a lot, and basically, I just think his personality, the way that he plays, the way that he enjoys it, I just love him, and he just seems such a nice guy as well. But then also, I think that, I actually think that you can make a massive case for Gabriel being the most important player for Arsenal so far this season. Huge void. I thought Hincapié was absolutely faultless. Absolutely so composed, competitive, strong, defiant. Yes, he's shorter. There's no doubt about it. But honestly, I thought he was great. Left-footed. I honestly thought there was a lot of kind of talk before the game who should replace him. I didn't think it was ever in doubt. Basically because he's just got that option. Why on earth would you bring Calafiori inside when he's been so good at left back? It just makes no sense to me. And if you sign a player like that, of that quality, well, if you don't play him now, you're never going to play him. I thought he was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I remember watching him when he partnered Mosquera in the League Cup game against Brighton, and we rang the changes for that game and rotated. But Brighton again just lacked so much threat because of what the likes of Hincapié and Mosquera did in that game. And if you ever needed any reassurance that Hincapié would be fine to kind of battle against some of the more threatening attacking teams in the league, and not that Spurs offered loads yesterday, but that was in part because of how he stifled them and how Arsenal as a unit stifled them. But this was Eberechi Eze's derby. There's no question about that. He took this game by the scruff of the neck and just generated such brilliant emotion and hype, and just a sense of, this is why we love this game so much, because of moments like this. 47 years since Alan Sunderland's hat-trick, the last hat-trick to be scored. in the North London derby in the league. And I think looking at, John, a player in Eze who we discussed last week a little bit and talked about maybe how we hadn't necessarily hit the ground as well as maybe people would have wanted. And positionally, there were still some questions about him and how he was operating in the number 10 position in this current setup that we found ourselves in with Ødegaard, very close to making his way back. I mean, what a headline act he was.
Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And it did play into what we talked about last week, I thought. Because I think he's been fine. I think he's been really good. And certain games he's played really well. And basically saying, oh, there's a good player there. But this was him absolutely commanding the stage. And I tell you, quite apart from, his goals and also that those wonderful moments of skill, I thought you saw a physicality there as well. That basically, even when, the first goal, he showed big physical strength really to burst through and score that goal. But I also thought it allowed him to dominate and basically really own the pitch and own the moment. And basically, when he was always looking for the ball, I think on Match of the Day 2 last night, they were basically, highlighting how he chased back and won the ball in his own sort of area, basically, and sort of won the ball back. They came up with a beautiful headline, by the way, sort of kind of to illustrate that. Eze like a Sunday mauling, which was just, it was absolutely fabulous. So credit to the sort of kind of caption writer there. But I just, I just thought he owned that place and that pitch. The other thing that really stood out for me was apart from his game intelligence, and he really sort of kind of making himself available and aware and knowing what's around him. He's super intelligent on the pitch. Is that basically I just thought his shoulders as the game wore on went back and just looked relaxed, comfortable, and just basically as if he owned the place. This was his stage. And I think up until now, I wonder whether there's been a little bit of want to do myself justice, want to be at my best. If he can relax and be himself, he will absolutely be sensational. And that's what we got the glimpse of, in the North London derby. And that's why it was so enjoyable, I thought.
Yeah, I think his first goal was that first sign that he was kind of feeling the game, because it's like a couple of, in those moments where you've got two defenders around you, you want to take the extra touches and maybe that little gap opens. And I'd say he's a type of player that Arsenal have desperately needed, where he doesn't overthink things too much. And when the chance is there, he will just try and go for it. And I think Arsenal have maybe, it's not a case of being overcoached, but it's like the philosophy is around trying to create the perfect opportunity, the perfect opening. And that doesn't tend to come from just outside the box or, from 30 yards out or whatever. And so I think sometimes when you've got such a structured, detailed system and philosophy, you need those mavericks in your team to just unlock the door and try something different and create a problem that the opposition haven't thought about. And I thought his first goal in particular, where he just kind of lets rip in a moment where there's a little half chance, the ball kind of pops out and he just goes for it, was a perfect example of that. He's got the confidence for the second on his left foot, and the third is just a brilliant kind of the touch to then, I'm not sure who it was, who just ends up sliding across the floor as they lose their footing. And it's a perfect kind of like a piece of artistry, if you like, of just footballing skill. I remember the game where Gabriel Jesus against Man United kind of checked back, and I think it was Dalot comes sliding across. He's just been utterly destroyed by the touch. And it was similar to that as his first touch that takes the defender out of the game, and he just whips this shot round Vicario. And it was just a brilliant. Just very quickly, did you, with all of the controversy around offside goals in the Liverpool City game and then the Liverpool Nottingham Forest game, did you feel there was any argument that Spurs had with Trossard being in Vicario's eye line? Because Joe Hart really thought in Match of the Day that it should have been ruled out.
Yeah, no, I really didn't. And I've become somewhat of a sort of refereeing and sort of kind of laws bore. Basically, I follow it far closer than I actually probably should. But I didn't feel that. A journalistic colleague, as I went to sit down basically for the second half, they said, "Oh, we've just seen that still picture. I think that goal should have been disallowed." So I said, "Well, why?" And basically, it's sort of kind of saying, "Well, the three player in the eye line." Well, I said, "Well, I'm not, no, I've seen it again, and no, there's no argument there." And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "No, go back and have a look," basically. So it was interesting, that analysis, and I really like Joe Hart as a pundit, but I did disagree with him on that. It's the obvious one really is we throw back to Man City, Liverpool, and Robertson.
Yeah.
Robertson makes a move and basically ducks, and yes, he's getting out the way, but in its own way, that is a distraction for Donnarumma. Vicario has a clear view of the shot, the striker, if you like, in Eze as he strikes the ball, and basically that is not, in my view, when you look, obscured by the three, and none of the three make a move towards the ball in any way. So, in my view, they got it absolutely spot on. And I know people say, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? But we have to, have to look at the laws really closely. And that particular one that they showed on Match of the Day 2, at the last one, making an obvious movement towards the ball, basically, is the one. Because none of them did that.
Yeah,
I must say, I thought the one at Anfield was interesting. If it had been a narrower scoreline, I think we probably would have heard a lot of Liverpool feedback, because actually he was closer to Alisson when that one goes in than any of the three Arsenal players. So I didn't think there was a great deal of controversy. And needless to say, in fairness to Spurs, I don't really. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that they've made too much of a fuss of it. Vicario did, but basically at the time. But I didn't think they had particular case.
Yeah, we align, and the referee review piece that we do after every weekend is up, which goes into Joe Hart's kind of analysis and maybe slightly where I differ, and also just a roundup quickly, because I think a lot of Arsenal fans have had a lot to say about Michael Oliver in recent months, obviously since Wolves. I thought he had a very good performance, actually, officiating the game, and the narrative around his association in Arsenal matches, we can easily get carried away, especially fans can get easily carried away and believe things that aren't really there, and at times. But I think that he had a very good game. Arsenal took the game away from any kind of fine margins that would be defined by a refereeing decision, of course, which was important. But the game flowed. There wasn't any kind of big interruptions, challenges that were clearly fouls were. There were some moments where the game nearly bubbled over, and it kind of just let them fizzle out. And I thought that was very, from a derby officiating standpoint, I think it did really well.
He did, actually.
Yeah,
I think it's really worth highlighting that, because I don't think there's a supporter base that is probably more paranoid about officials than Arsenal, and sometimes with good reason.
Yeah,
and basically, because I have to say, I did a story on it, because I thought earlier in the season when Jared Gillette basically got another Arsenal appointment, I'm thinking, this is crazy. Have they got anyone else?
Yeah,
and basically, I'm not saying he made any mistakes, but it's unhealthy. To actually have, kind of a referee involved in so many games for one team, in my view. And then basically, Mike Oliver, we shouldn't ignore the fact that he's the top, along with Anthony Taylor, regarded as the top. And basically, I thought he was very lenient in the first half, but actually it helped the derby flow. And so I thought he had a really good game. No, it's a good shout, Tom.
Indeed. But it was kind of, it's nice to kind of mention this next player next, because he bookends the game in a way for me, because he scores the first and he sets up the fourth. And that's Leandro Trossard, who, in the summer, there was talk about his future. We wasn't assured that he was still going to be here for this season. Arsenal improved his contract. They didn't extend his contract, but his terms have been improved to our understanding. I asked Mikel about him after the game, to which he said it was forbidden that he would leave, which I thought was quite a nice line on Leo. And he just, Arteta just seems enamoured really by what he offers this team, and I feel as though he's taken his game to a different height this season. His goal at Sunderland was sublime. His finish, even though it does get a nice kind of deflection off Van der Ven's foot, but the spin and the attempt on goal, the run itself for his goal is great. And then, of course, another left-footed cross, which is something that, even despite being strongly right-footed, he has got a real great ability to find teammates with that left boot, with those low-driven crosses, as he does for Eze, for that fourth goal. So, John, your thoughts on Leo and him and his place in this current Arsenal team?
Well, Tom, I think you raised a really good point, to be honest, asking Arteta about it, because I thought, he was definitely, if you had three standout performances, he was definitely in the conversation. And his work rate and application, I thought, was brilliant in the game. What I love about him is that, well, it makes me laugh really, because it's a bit of a sort of kind of a contradiction really, because he does look at times, he looks a bit grumpy. Basically, I remember asking Arteta about it as a preview to a game think it was last, December or something, basically. So he looks so unhappy. His body language, he's not happy when he's not starting. And basically, when he comes on, he looks a bit grumpy. And basically, is he a bit of a moaner? And Arteta was laughing. And he basically said, yes, but if he carries on playing this well, I don't care whether he moans, which is a fairly good shout. But when they did that contract, there were offers for him in the summer. There's no doubt about that. There's interest in him in the summer. And it felt to me as if some of that maybe might have been driven by, dare I say it, the sort of kind of the player side of things, simply because, am I being loved here? Should I go elsewhere? And then when Arsenal sort of, rather than sell, which I thought was a possibility, I think it was a possibility. They decided, okay, we're going to nail this down. And I may be wrong here, but this comes from speaking to, agents in the past, but it's always been the case that you can't just improve someone's wages. So, they'll have to change the terms in some way, in some form in the contract, and there was even talk this weekend, wasn't there, about perhaps, extending the length of the contract. But I may be proved wrong here, but I wonder whether they've sort of changed the terms in some way to allow them to give him a pay rise. And basically, he's absolutely deserved it. And I think it's recognition of the player and what he stands for. I love his mindset. His determination. Because I'll be honest, when they signed Eze, and they've still got Nweri, who they re-signed to a new contract. They've signed Madueke, and they've not signed They've not signed the megastar left winger who, maybe people thought, but basically Martinelli's still there. Thinking, when's Trossard going to get a game? And he wasn't necessarily in the team starting, from the off, but fought his way back. He's brilliant when he comes on, and in the last few weeks, I must say, from the off, I think he's been brilliant. And that, I think, is tribute to his mindset, his determination. And I love that about him. I think he's kind of almost, a bit of an unsung hero, isn't it? He's incredibly good value for money. What was it, 27 million?
Yeah, it's 21 up front and then 6 in add-ons,
What is that about? What a steal. What a top player. And basically, he's brilliant. What he's done in this particular run shouldn't be understated, because I think he's really proven his quality. And I think so much of that is down to mindset. I really admire that about him and his determination. It's brilliant.
He just continues to be a really big game player and a big moment player for Arsenal. And when you were mentioning kind of like the players that Arsenal brought in and kind of the uncertainty in the summer, I was just looking at the lineup from the United game in the first game of the season. Gabriel Martinelli started on the left, but it was Madueke who came on for Martinelli toward the end. Trossard was an unused substitute in that game. So thinking about kind of where he's come and his profile's come since that point, and maybe there was still arguably some question marks about kind of his future at that point of the summer, with it being early August, but still seeing kind of the rise, seeing where he's got, and seeing how fans perceive him now as opposed to 3 months ago, and that change in the perception of the player, because he's just the first man on the team sheet at the moment on the left-hand side for Arsenal. There's not any question mark really about that. We did see Martinelli and Madueke, of course, return to the squad. Madueke got off the bench as well, which is great to see, because Arsenal's games coming up are going to be thick and fast and very challenging, and Arteta's going to have to call on a lot of his squads. Strikers will be returning soon. Victor Gyökeres, Kai Havertz, Gabriel Jesus is going to be doing some internal matches, I imagine, probably alongside the youth sides.
You love an internal match, don't you, Tom?
I do. I love a behind the scenes game. I've got a piece coming out about it today.
It's good.
I think it's really interesting, kind of the process by which players are brought back to full fitness, and how, because it's so difficult to replicate the in match conditions, outside of being in a match itself for a player. And I thought, one of the curious things I was conscious about asking maybe last Friday, I ended up going down a different pathway, but was to kind of think about, with Spurs, Bayern, Chelsea, and all these players coming back, that's a real challenge to reintegrate players into match fitness when you've got so many returning and you've got so much on the line. It's, with respect to perhaps teams in the bottom half of the table like Liverpool, what might be easier to kind of bed some of those players in at home in the Emirates against a Leeds United or a West Ham United, as opposed to, say, a North London derby or Stamford Bridge or Bayern Munich. It must take a different mindset, John, to think about how you reintegrate players.
Yeah, it's a great shout, that. Particularly of the calibre of players that have come back. You know, I mean, as we sort of sit here now, we're sort of kind of looking at, you know, over the next few games, over the next few weeks, the likes of Odegaard, Jesus, you know, Kai Havertz as well, coming back into the frame. I'm hearing great things about Jesus and his attitude, you know, and his determination to come back. Absolutely fabulous. You know, I think sometimes we forget what a player he is. Yeah. And basically, he's a top-level player when he's at his best. And he, unfortunately, when he got that knee injury, he was in a purple patch of form. He's brilliant, really good. So he really has got something to offer to the squad. But you're right. But the only thing that I think about that is I totally agree with you. You've got to get the balance right so you keep your intensity, but also you kind of keep the rhythm and shape of the team. This week is hard, right? But I looked at this and I know I've got a kind of sort of one that sort of grates with me a little bit, and I'll come on to it. Chelsea away on Sunday is followed by Brentford at home on the Wednesday night.
Yeah.
Followed by Aston Villa, who are in a rich vein of form, on Saturday lunchtime.
Yeah.
That is downright criminal. Honestly, that is a shocker. So Crystal Palace had their sort of, I know this is a bit of a beef now, but then basically Crystal Palace were able to shift their game to give their players a bit of a break. Well, can Arsenal ring up the Premier League basically and say this is not on? I mean, honestly, I do think away from home Saturday lunchtime after a Wednesday night game, are you serious?
I'm hearing Jurgen Klopp in my ear.
I think that's crazy.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right. You know, and I think that basically it would be okay if it was the same for everyone. But when you're shifting games like they have done now for other teams, well, how's this come about?
Yeah.
And so basically you will definitely have to utilize that squad and basically be part of it. But also I don't think you can really kind of stay at an intense level while changing 6, 7, 8 players. And basically you can't, you really got to manage it ever so cleverly. And I think Odegaard is a great captain, great leader, sets a tone on the pitch. I'm sure he'll be pushing, but then what about Eze's performance? Can you really stick him back out on the left? You know,
well,
I love Havertz. Havertz is a great player. I wouldn't mind betting that I wonder whether you might even see Havertz and he's just in for that Palace game on the 23rd. You know, just things like that. You got to utilize the squad right now, and the Arsenal squad depth is great. But my word, these 2 weeks are a test of Arsenal's mettle. If Arsenal can come out the other side, and they made a good start, by the way, of these couple of weeks, wow, it will be a hugely impressive, you know, piece of work, I think.
Yeah, because the idea that the City, Chelsea, Liverpool, other potential title chasers have to be also perfect, effectively to catch up to Arsenal with they've opened as well. And just last point on this game before we kind of turn our eyes more into that future direction as we are doing now. I have one slight nitpick about the management of the game on Sunday, and it bleeds into this discussion about fixtures and games. As they scored the 4th goal in the 76th minute, Madueke came on in the 78th minute. We didn't make another change until the 88th minute when Hincapié came off and Marino came off. And then Calafiori, who had actually gone down 4 minutes earlier, I think with cramp, came off in the 92nd minute for Lewis Skelly. I feel as though that Arteta can be maybe a little bit too slow to make changes early in games when they have a significant lead. And I remember like examples like when I think we were 5-0 up at Sheffield United at half-time. And I don't think any changes were made at half-time. Martinelli then got injured in the second half, which could have maybe been avoided. It's easy to say with hindsight, I know, but it's these moments I feel when Arsenal have a significant lead with Bayern on Wednesday and with this coming up. As soon as Eze scored that 4th goal, I would have been like, Lewis Skelly on, Mosquera on, Norgard on, and ring the changes for the last 15 minutes with that significant lead. Trust those players to help see out the game and rest that little extra bit and not increase the risk and rather decrease the chance of an injury. Am I nitpicking too much, or is there a point there?
No, I think you've got a point. It was really noticeable to me about Calafiori. I think Calafiori is a player who clearly, I love Calafiori. I think he's great entertainment. I think he's had an amazing season. And by the way, is it a coincidence that you've basically suddenly got Gabriel Heinze basically on the coaching staff, and all of a sudden you've got a natural, left-sided defender in the left back rather than Lewis Skelly? I mean, I actually feel a bit sorry for Miles. Super kid. What a great future he's got. But basically, he's just been ousted, isn't he? A little bit.
Maybe if he grows his hair out like Gabriel Heinze and Calafiori, he'll be able to connect a bit better. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. But I think he's got a massive future for club and country, no doubt about it. But basically, certainly couldn't never entertain letting him go, because he'll play a lot of minutes this season. Absolutely convinced of that. But then basically, you're right. I think that Calafiori, you might as well kind of wrap him up in cotton wool, because he is little bit. You're always worried about Calafiori, aren't you? Basically, and particularly when a player gets cramped, that's you are always prone to pull something and stuff because you're overcompensating or whatever. But I hear what you're saying, because yesterday wasn't about the POM squad, was it? Basically, bringing on all the forwards. It was about seeing the game out, and I do agree with that, because sometimes you think, what's Norgard come for? What, to play a few games in the Carabao Cup?
Yeah,
and basically this is a good player, and basically he's clearly someone again that's bought into the squad system and basically been part of it and is willing to do that. So I like that thought about him. And then basically, but yeah, you're right. I think you probably got to sort of kind of make sure, because it's in the last 10 minutes when the players get tired and fatigued and potentially injured, really, because they're in the red zone effectively.
There's no doubt if it was Jorginho on the bench instead of Norgard, I almost certainly probably would be having the confidence maybe to bring on. But with Norgard having had such limited minutes, maybe that lack of again, I always struggle with saying the word trust, because I don't think it's about trust, but just the comfortability and the ease in which he knows other players can fit into the system, and he knows what he's going to get from them, I guess. And obviously Zubi and Rice are of such a high standard. Whoever you replace any of them with in those positions, it's going to be a drop off. So I guess there are reasons, but I always feel as though when there's part of me when I hear Mikel rightfully complain about the volume of injuries he gets, I'm like, well, then you need to make sure that you're doing absolutely everything within your power to reduce and mitigate the chance of injuries from happening. And did he do that? So
no, Tom, I totally agree with you. It's totally illogical for Arsenal to have three forwards in Gyökeres, Jesus, and Kai Havertz in the central position, and all three be out injured. I honestly think if there's one, Arteta has been brilliant, and how can you criticise him today of all days?
Yeah, I know.
But if there's one aspect, it's not always just bad luck when you're getting injuries. You've got to manage the squad and manage the training and manage the kind of group. Because honestly, it's too much of a coincidence that basically you've got three strikers, which is a big number for any squad. And basically, even in this squad, to have three players of that caliber and class, and all three out injured. How's that happened?
Yeah. No, I'm saying it not because I want to be critical. I'm saying it because because if I think there's one thing that's going to undermine Arsenal's chance of winning stuff, Arteta's chance of winning stuff, it's going to be the injuries to the squad. So if any way we can mitigate that needs to be taken. We move to our flashback segment, which is actually the element of the show last week that I had the most people saying I loved John going back to 1987, and it's like I got a little shout out for my 2012 North London Derby shout, but it was the 1987 one that people seem to enjoy a lot. So we're not going to take you as far back as that for our flashback segment, and of course we're doing these shows at the moment every week, which means we've got two games coming up this week before me and John will reconvene next week, and that's the home game against Bayern before Arsenal travel to Stamford Bridge in the Premier League. And with it being a flashback segment, we're going to separate and we're going to do a game each. So with Bayern up first, John, do you want to give me a moment, a flashback memory, something that you think is significant with Arsenal's relationship with Bayern to bring to the fold?
Well, very much into the kind of the relationship. Arsenal have met, it feels to me that Arsenal have met Bayern a hell of a lot, actually, in sort of Champions League era. And at one stage, they were very competitive, sort of, I do remember sort of narrowly going out, sort of, 20 odd years ago, but basically in latter Wenger times, how can I say this? But they generally took a battering and basically, some 5-1 batterings in there. And basically that showed the sort of kind of gap really between, and I'm not being negative here because I'm going to swing it around to a positive, but basically I think it was 2017, wasn't it? Basically you had back-to-back 5-1 defeats, and basically which made for a 10-2 aggregate. Yes, I've got my maths head on. And it was towards the end of the Wenger era, but it also highlighted the absolute, I'm afraid to say, Arsenal's gap between the European elite, and I mean they really, really got battered in those games. And even when I think they're basically, you wanted them to see them do well, and basically they sort of kind of had high level players who were proving the point. There was a lot of talk about Mesut Ozil playing against Bayern, wanted to prove the point. Arsenal completely overwhelmed and outclassed, and basically it was really, really difficult. They had sort of kind of nothing to answer for. And I just think now, when you look at it, what we're talking 8 years on, I think it's remarkable how they've turned that around. And basically now, I would make a case in this current time. I think Arsenal and Bayern are the most formed teams and arguably the best two teams in Europe right now. I think Arsenal are producing fantastic performance levels, incredibly consistent. And I think Bayern are blowing teams away. Blimey, I was listening to sort of kind of commentary Saturday afternoon, and there were sort of regular updates from Bayern's game with Freiburg. And at one stage, they were 2-0 down. Harry Kane's been absolutely on fire for them. And basically, Harry Kane will have all those kind of memories about Arsenal, kind of closing the door. I'm sure Harry Kane will do an interview or two about it. And basically, I love Harry Kane. I love his mentality of kind of, I'll show you wrong, basically. I just thought it was really worth highlighting. I do remember, I think also some years previously, Chesney getting sent off. I think double jeopardy, wasn't it? And all sorts of setbacks against Bayern. It seemed to Arsenal seemed to get them every year, but that game, those two games, 2017 were particularly bruising, and basically Wenger having to kind of defend those, seeing Wenger almost look this genius of a manager who I think is the greatest manager Arsenal have ever had and remains so, basically having to kind of stand up and defend those sort of kind of games. Listen, it's well documented. I think he stayed on too long, and that certainly felt as if, he'd done so then. And then all of a sudden you've got Mikel Arteta, who, by the way, Wenger is so, enthusiastic about, so kind of, pleased to see him do well. It's brilliant. I think the symmetry is great, and basically brings it back to kind of Arsenal being so competitive with Bayern. I think Wednesday's game will be an absolute cracker between two, well, arguably the best two teams in Europe right now.
Yeah, I am really looking forward to it. I think we can probably split these kind of segments actually up, and I'll do my flashback with Chelsea shortly, and we should stick with this theme of Bayern for the moment, because it is a game where I'm slightly torn about the approach, because I look at that Chelsea game on the weekend and think that's, for me, the more important game of the two, because Arsenal position themselves in the Champions League really, really well, winning their first four. And effectively, if you win 5, you almost guarantee yourself a top 8 finish and straight through to the last 16 of the competition. You can avoid that playoff. And with a home game against Kairat, they go to Club Brugge. They've got Inter Milan, the San Siro is no easy picnic. But I think that the emphasis, of course, this week will be on winning that Chelsea game as a priority over the Bayern game. But that said, Bayern Munich, the phrase I've been using this week is they've little broed us. It feels like they've little brothered us for too long. I mean, even when they drew us in the draw, the Twitter account for Bayern put out "Hello Arsenal" with just a waving, and I'm like, it's stuff like that. Like, it's just, this rhetoric needs to end. We need to put them in their place. And I know that Mikel Arteta will feel that, because he's obviously, as a player and a manager, experienced disappointment against Bayern. and did so a couple of seasons ago in the Champions League, where really all the emphasis on that Thomas Tuchel side was that they were the underdogs playing Arsenal in 2023-24. And Arsenal, of course, didn't play very well at all in Munich and lost that game 1-0, despite being by far the better team in the first leg, but not coming out with the victory that they needed to take into Germany. And obviously, while this isn't a knockout game, and it's very likely these two could meet again in the knockout phase of the competition when they inevitably both qualify for it, it does feel like Arsenal need to put a marker down in this game, make a statement in Europe, especially when they don't have Luis Diaz, who is a big miss. He's suspended for this game. Obviously, Jamal Musiala also out and has been for the whole of this season with a really serious injury. But almost as well, there's the chance, John, to build momentum into the weekend and this festive period too.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think that a draw, it's always difficult, isn't it? Sort of kind of going fantasy football here, but basically a draw wouldn't be the worst result in the world.
Yeah.
Because I think then that basically it just sets you up nicely. And, Arsenal did ever so well in the sort of kind of league campaign last year, but basically, drew away, didn't they, in against
they lost to Milan.
They lost to Inter, didn't they, basically?
Yeah.
And which again they shouldn't have lost, and basically they lost another game in Italy, drew another game in Italy, didn't they? Atalanta. When basically, do you remember Raya? I should remember this,
brilliant save,
but Raya's wonder save, his wonder double save.
Yeah, Retegi penalty.
It's astonishing. I don't think it naturally is sort of kind of necessarily kind of. I mean, Liverpool were dominant in the sort of the league phase, and what do they get rewarded with? PSG. So I don't know that we're back to this age-old thing, aren't we? In this format, I don't know how you best reward. Sort of kind of being very consistent and being sort of kind of champions of that league or doing well in that league, but there is no set way. So if Arsenal was to draw against Bayern, that would be by no means a bad result. That game 2 years ago actually was really interesting, wasn't it? Because I think Arsenal were the better side in the first game, but didn't quite put them away.
Yeah,
that incredible escape. Do you remember with Gabriel picking up the ball in the 6-yard box?
Yeah,
which basically, basically that was almost a precursor, because we've never really seen that happen before, have we? And now it feels a lot more common, even at Burnley at the weekend, and basically Tyrone Mings last season. And then basically, clearly Arsenal got away with one there.
I remember we were in the mix zone after that game, and I was arguing with Eric Dyer because I said to him, "What did you think about the Saka penalty incident at the end?" And he said, "Well, I thought we should have had a penalty." And I think we all looked around at each other like, "Well, what's he talking about?" And then he says, "Well, Gabriel picked the ball up." And none of us had seen it at that point of the day. We hadn't realised that had happened. And I was like, "What?" It was so
weird,
bizarre.
wasn't it? That was the night they put that into my consciousness. Because how is that not a penalty at Burnley?
Clear as day.
It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah,
even Sanchez looked surprised. I mean, it was absolutely bonkers. Anyway, but I do think that. I think this Bayern team and Harry Kane's goals are a really formidable team, and I personally think Vincent Kompany will be judged on clearly on what he achieves in the Champions League, because winning the Bundesliga for Bayern is par, basically. That's what expectation is, and you have to do better in the Champions League than I think that Bayern have. And I think that sort of in Harry Kane, they've also got an absolute goal machine. I know it's sacrilege to say this basically to Arsenal fans, but just what a player Harry Kane is. I think he's a brilliant player, and he's such a threat. And that will be a massive test, by the way, I think, for Hincapié and basically, Saliba. So there'll be a different kettle of fish. But I guess it's relationship building, and that will help. But I do think, it's really, really tantalising, this game. And I think it ties nicely in with the way just Arsenal having really massively improved upon recent times.
Oh, without question, to be where Arsenal were in 2017, just in free fall, declining, regressing, moving on to Unai Emery, which in the end proved to be probably the wrong choice. It might have been the right stepping stone to get to where we are, and it gave Arteta those couple extra kind of 18 months or so to get ready, because he was definitely in the frame when they appointed Unai Emery as well. And where this team has grown, where the squad looks, players are choosing Arsenal over. I mean, when Kai Havertz joined, Bayern Munich were very keen on Kai, and he wanted to stay in England definitely, but Arsenal were a big draw for him, and to see Arsenal win the race for players like him, young players as well that they've brought in. There's no doubt that Bayern have looked at plenty of the players that Arsenal have also been signing over the last few seasons, and it seems like Arsenal is by far the more kind of favoured destination for players for a project. And Vincent Kompany's got a very interesting scenario, I think, at Bayern, where Harry Kane isn't getting any younger, of course. He's still a brilliant player in brilliant form, but that position will be overhauled in the coming week. They've had two hugely experienced centre forwards in Robert Lewandowski and now Harry Kane, of course, as well. And where that next stage is for them is going to be very interesting. I saw links to Gyökeres actually in the summer before he'd made the switch to Arsenal, that Bayern were keeping kind of an eye on him. And it seems they want to go down that kind of experienced centre forward and a younger option always to be kind of that spearhead of their attack. But there's no, as I said before, no Luis Diaz, no Musiala. Arsenal have got this game against Chelsea. I think there is need for some rotation, potentially. I think with players like Madueke getting some minutes, you could argue maybe he can get some more significant game time, but then who do you drop? Because you don't want to drop Trossard, you don't want to drop Saka. It becomes very, very difficult. Is Odegaard going to be in the frame? We don't know. He was in with a chance this last weekend, but didn't get there. I'd be very surprised if he was in a starting 11, that's for sure. And then you've got some other defensive changes. Does he decide to bring Mosquera in for this game? Luis Skelly was excellent against Atletico Madrid. Is it a game for him to come in where you can't really drop Calafiori? And so you look ahead then to this Chelsea game, and just to kind of go back to that flashback, because the game that always stands out for me, and there is a personal element to this, as I was telling you about off air before we started, and that's the 5-3 victory at Stamford Bridge, where Robin van Persie gets a hat trick. But I think the most memorable goal scorer for most Arsenal fans that day is Andre Santos, because it was just the most out the blue, strange scenario in 2011. I'd personally just been taken to the Emirates Stadium for my first ever experience there on a stadium tour before me and my dad then went to the pub to watch this game. John, that 5-3, it's an age ago now, and it's a very different Arsenal team. Arteta played in that game. And where Arsenal are in terms of where this Chelsea team are, it's both teams are completely kind of the other way round now. Both teams, where Arsenal were then, is kind of where Chelsea are now, where they wanted to be somewhere where they weren't, and where Arsenal are now, where that Chelsea side were, which was competing on all fronts for every competition.
Absolutely, that game. I was at that game and I was doing that game, and wow, it's just astonishing. I mean, the goal that really stands out was sort of kind of Van Persie over the sort of the left-hand side of the penalty box. The ball comes across to him, and he just cuts through it beautifully with incredible technique. With his wand of a left foot, smashes it into the top corner. It's a beautiful goal. Absolutely fabulous. But there is dear old Andre Santos, who was, I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think he was part of the supermarket sweep at the end of
Mertesacker and Arteta and Santos. Yeah.
Yes. And then basically was part of that kind of desperate thing, which I have to say, you look back in time and they were signed on the back of Arsenal squeezing into the Champions League. I think it was through the playoff in Udine, and basically they beat Udinese. And honestly, that was a frantic few days because they basically qualified for that. In the searing heat, I did that. Game was absolutely rasping, and basically they did it. It was a hard game, a hard test, and then they got smashed, didn't they, at United on Sunday. And then basically Santos was part of that. And I loved it when I saw recently, I don't know if people had seen that basically, I think he visited the Arsenal training ground.
Oh, did he?
Yes.
I didn't know this.
There's some nice pictures and basically of him and with Arteta, and basically it was lovely. And basically,
amazing.
It was great. And, and was part of it. And this was a guy that caused much amusement, I think, around basically, because he used to regularly, I'm not saying this is his only car, but I think he used to turn up to the training ground in a smart car. Bit of an understated kind of, you see them these days. He was a bit of a character, and shall we say, he didn't always look the most perfect athlete, can we say? And then most out of keeping, but he did have good technique, and he was sort of kind of quite a figure in that game, and he just made me laugh. Basically, he was a character. Basically, didn't it?
I've just seen the photos. They're great.
Yeah, it's great, isn't it? It's absolutely
he's looking well, to be fair, Andre Santos now. He's looking very well
it's
indeed.
nice.
Yeah.
It's lovely. It's lovely.
Yeah.
You're looking at the training ground pics, aren't you? And it's brilliant. And and it's honestly, he was a real character. And basically, I love the look on Arteta's face as he's welcomed us to the training ground there, because that is kind of recognition of a guy who's played with, shared a dressing room with, been a teammate with. What a character. What crazy times, by the way. Just absolutely mental.
Yeah, that we remember them fondly for all the wrong reasons.
We do, but it was so proper comedy style. And it is so in contrast with kind of Arsenal now of 2025.
So
when basically every signing is basically sort of kind of fanfare on social media, and basically there's so much research, there's so much done to it, and it's just an absolute contrast with that crazy 48 hours that basically to almost save Arsenal squad, done on a budget that was only rescued by Champions League qualification. I mean, honestly, that was the story of Arsenal then, and that's why I still remain to this day the saying that basically that Wenger had brilliant early days and early success, but the years of challenge when they were desperate to get into the Champions League to balance the books because they'd moved to the Emirates, they were almost as big an achievement, I would argue, for some time. And basically stayed too long, but my word, those days were an incredible challenge. And now you look at the footing that Arsenal have, and basically it's because of those foundations, I think.
Well, if maybe we hadn't have had that supermarket sweep, we wouldn't even be here today. The butterfly effect of Arteta signing after the Udine victory led to an association with Arsenal that, came very much full circle managerial terms, and Arsenal as a result are a very different place today. So it might be one of the best £8 million signings they ever made.
It was great. That deal, I remember that sort of kind of every step of the way. It was on, it was off. There was lots of talk about him not actually having time to do a medical, and basically then he was back on again. And basically, I always admired him as a talker, as a personality in the dressing room, as a player. All the young players, including Jack Wilshere, used to call him coach because Arteta, because he just basically had this aspiration always from day one as a senior player to be a manager, and basically wanted to kind of be a manager. It was obvious, that he had something and something special, really, and so it has proved.
Yeah, I think it was Oxlade-Chamberlain was speaking on Ben Foster's podcast, and he spoke about how Arteta basically as a player introduced like analysis and stuff as a player into like the dressing. It was so some.
There's a great story. I love watching that, and I love Alex as a personality, brilliant personality.
Yeah,
he's a brilliant personality in the dressing room. He's a great guy, great character. When we talk about how respect and stuff, no wonder he's been welcomed back at the training ground to do some training, by the way. But that was really interesting. But I love the story of the time when Arsenal were sort of kind of counting down the hours of the window, and basically, back in the day, and sort of kind of threatening then not to sign a striker, which was ever us, basically, with Arsene Wenger, who's treated the club's money as his own. But there's a great story about Arteta and Mertesacker basically almost pinning Arteta up against kind of the gym wall and say, Danny Welbeck's here with England, basically. You got to go and get him. And basically, and that's how it happened. So he almost pulling off the signings before he was even manager.
Incredible scenes. So just we round down now, looking ahead to that Chelsea game at the weekend, obviously as well. What have you made, obviously covering more broadly across the Premier League, of this Chelsea team? Because it almost feels like they've been a bit of a dark horse of the Premier League, it seems, and have kind of snuck up on the title race almost, because they're 6 points behind Arsenal. They go 3 points behind them if they win, and all of a sudden that could change the entire complexion of their season. Yet I've spoken to our Chelsea writer Bobby Vincent about them. He hasn't necessarily always been so impressed by them in certain fixtures, but they seem to keep picking up points. So what have you made of Chelsea, and what type of threat are they going to pose to Arsenal?
I think they're a very different team without Cole Palmer, and I think he's obviously out of this game, and basically I think
bizarre circumstances, like
bizarre, kicked the door, I think, and basically fractured a toe, so was just about to come back to full training before a big week for them, and then all of a sudden he's got another layoff. But I do think that I don't know. I'm going to write on this later in the week, but basically, I don't know that Maresca always gets the credit that he deserves, and I think that last season to win a European trophy, to guide the club back into the Champions League places, and then win the Club World Cup with a tactical master plan, by the way. So I think that they will face a good team with defensive issues.
Yeah,
I think they could improve the goalkeeper. I don't think the defence always looks as strong a unit as it could. I think Caicedo is the best of his type in the world as a midfielder. But I get annoyed when I see these constant comparisons between him and Declan Rice. Why would you compare them? They're totally and utterly different players. Arsenal don't have a Caicedo because Zubamendi's not that player either, because, again, he plays in a different style. Caicedo, as I see it, is N'Golo Kante. Is Michael Essien. He's that different player. I love him. I think he's fabulous. But he's not... Stop the Rice comparisons. It's stupid because Rice is now at his best as a rampaging marauding number 8.
Yeah.
I don't think that it's always been the case that basic Caicedo and Enzo Fernandez have worked together. But I think basically the better dynamic is sometimes when Lavia comes in, but Lavia just cannot seem to stay fit. I feel sorry for the player. He's a brilliant player. But I think that they've finally got that balance right and they've got that understanding. It's taken the time. So I think their strength and power base is in midfield without a shadow of a doubt. I think João Pedro has been an exceptional signing. Really, really good bit of business. And I really like Pedro Neto. I think he's an exciting player who kind of gets you off your seat, scored a really good goal at Burnley. This is a long way of saying, basically, sometimes you never know what you're going to get from Chelsea because they are a bit unpredictable. They are a bit inconsistent.
Yes.
And I think that's because they basically have so many, had so many games and so much, pressures on the players that I think sometimes that is the reasoning behind why they've been a bit unpredictable in games. But one-off games, when Maresca has a time and has a thought and a process, I think he's a very good tactician. And basically, you see that against that was an epic game that they had against Liverpool at Stamford Bridge, where they won through in the Club World Cup in the summer. How on earth did they overcome PSG? Well, they did. Yeah. And they were brilliant in that game because of Maresca's tactics. They were at it. And basically, he talked about kind of really high press, high energy. Even in that heat, it was quite unusual, but that's what Chelsea can do. When they're at their best, they can. So I think Arsenal face a really dangerous team. I don't think that they will end up second, but I do think that they will end up top 4. So I think Man City will probably, be Arsenal's closest challenger. It's just my personal opinion. But I think the more, Chelsea talk about fatigue and injuries and how many players and how many games they've had, the more it plays into the player's head. And I don't think that's particularly helpful. But I honestly think if they finish top 4 again, Maresca shouldn't get criticism. He should get praise. It's been a remarkable journey. And I think he doesn't get the credit he deserves, Maresca.
Starting to stabilise them, certainly off the back of some chaotic seasons. Really. So, yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I am going to do my usual mean thing and ask for some predictions. So, win, lose or draw, Bayern and Chelsea.
Oh, well, 2 draws.
Lovely job. We're winning both.
See what I did there? You?
In all seriousness, 2 draws or?
Oh, no. I think that Bayern will be a really hard game, and I kind of think they will have to. I wouldn't mind betting that you see Lewis Skelly start at left back and things like that. Small tweaks.
Yeah, good
player come in for good player, basically. But I do think Bayern will be a big test, and I think that will end up as a draw. And Chelsea, well, yeah. I think that's a hard game at Stamford Bridge. And basically, I think if Arsenal could come through with a draw and then a win at Stamford Bridge, you take that all day long. But it's another London derby. Yeah. And I just think, that's why I think slightly, because it's such a big week, maybe a draw again. But I did predict that.
No, fair enough. It's worked well for us so far. We'll see when we reconvene next week. We'll see if it's worked again. I am going to go for a draw in the Bayern game as well, and I'm going to go for a victory at Stamford Bridge. I haven't got too much to say analysis-wise around the two games other than what we've already said. And just, I'd love to get a result over Bayern, but for me, I think rotation is going to be important for that game, and we should rotate ahead of the weekend, which is the more important game for Arsenal. Chelsea are good, but they've definitely got their flaws still. And Arsenal just seeming, based on what we witnessed at the weekend, in such electric kind of fashion and form and dominance and power. And they might have some more players back and in better fitness and form, the likes of Martinelli and Madueke sharper by that point as well, hopefully too, to be options. Madueke returning to Stamford Bridge, of course, for the first time. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of reception he gets, but we'll react to all of that in next week's show. John, absolute pleasure as always to join you. Do you want to give the listeners a shout out to what you've got coming up that they might be intrigued about, if you have anything to tease so far?
Oh yeah. Well, I tell you what, I have done a piece on sort of kind of the unity within the Arsenal squad. I just think it was so telling, this celebration, not just of the players that won on the pitch, but the way that the injured players joined in. You might say that's obvious, but it really isn't. And then basically, I think that's something to be celebrated, because some players get the hump, some players sulk, and basically some players don't join in. This squad is together, and I think that basically that's the really important thing. And so, yeah, I tell you what I'm also going to look at. I'm going to look at this week, ahead of the Bayern game, there's kind of maybe a little bit more behind the inside story about Harry Kane, his time at Arsenal, and what happened there. And I think that I haven't completely got all my ducks in a row yet, but I've been talking to a couple of people about it, and I think that will be, keep an eye out for that, please.
Lovely stuff. From a personal
what are you doing?
I'm going to do something around how the fact that Arsenal have scored 11 of their last 13 goals from open play, and that rhetoric at the start of the season that Arsenal are reliant on set pieces, and that's the undertone of their season, and how they've kind of overcome that in the last few weeks. And so I'm going to focus in a little bit on that. Of course, Mikel Arteta's press conference tomorrow ahead of the Bayern game as well, and the open training session. So it'll be interesting to see if there's anybody present who's not been present of late. We'll see. Obviously, we expected the likes of Gabriel, Jesus, Martinelli, and Madueke, but will Ødegaard be there? Will Kai Havertz be there? They are question marks that will be answered, of course, there. And then, of course, hearing from both him and Thomas Tuchel will be at the Emirates. Are you going down for that, Thomas?
Yeah, I'm at the Emirates on Wednesday night. Yeah. For
the press conference at the Emirates.
For the press, no. It's Vincent Kompany.
Sorry, oh my goodness gracious me.
That would be a good story.
Of course it's Vincent Kompany.
Vincent Kompany. I always have a bee in my bonnet about how a manager could get relegated with Burnley and get the Bayern job. But, he's clearly proving me wrong. So what do I know? But we'll see. Yeah. But I think he's quite an interesting talker, Vincent.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that would be quite interesting.
We'll hear from him from the Emirates, not Thomas Tuchel, Vincent Kompany from the Emirates on Tuesday night as well. And then the game. And then, of course, Chelsea at the weekend. Arteta on Friday ahead of that one, we expect to. And then we'll reconvene, as we say, to have you a Monday upload for next week. Fingers crossed, because we've got a game against Bruges coming up soon as well in the Champions League, and Aston Villa away, and Brentford, and there's lots of games coming that we need to be ready for. So that's going to be very interesting indeed. But thank you, listeners, for tuning in. If you've enjoyed it, do let us know. Give us your feedback in the comments section. Drop the likes and the subscriptions, or the usual YouTube-y stuff that people do these days. And you can leave a little 5-star review on Spotify or a written review on iTunes. We would really appreciate it. You can usually find all of us our usual socials at John Cross Mirror, I believe. Correct. Yep. And at Tom Canton Media as well. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back very soon. And as always, keep seeing red.